is the enemy. So straight. And the problem is that all young trees and even some old ones want to grow straight. And so pruning is how you alter that. Whether it's topping a tree, whether it's pruning branches, whatever it does, it makes the tree change directions. And in the case of pines, which almost all of them are vertical growers with some notable exceptions, and the contorted forms are the exceptions. But the black pines and red pines and Scots pines, all of those, the normal tree is a linear grower. And so that's the idea of the pruning. The pruning changes the direction of growth. And changes in direction can lead to a very highly coveted thing by me, and that's a gnarly kind of growth. And the real problem is that young trees have this linear vertical growth because their roots are close to the foliage. In other words, the end of the root is close, and so water is easy to get there. And so a suffusion or an abundance of water in the foliage makes things shoot out. So gnarly is the opposite of that. And so old trees grow gnarly because they are short of water. Let's back up here and I'll give you a little bit of a graphic picture of that in a natural thing. So up on top of the hill over there in the distance, come a little further, is an old growth grand fir tree. And it's about 600 years old. And it's dying from the top. And the reason it's dying from the top is because when it achieved maturity, which was between 400 and 500 years, the roots were so long and the pipeline was so long that the pressure failed, and so the top started to get flat because it couldn't go higher, couldn't lift the water. Meanwhile, the root keeps growing, so finally the tree starts to die down from the top, leaving that remnant, that dead top on there. And so all young trees are going up to points because they still have a lot of water because the roots are closer. So an old tree, because the roots are so long, the pump starts to fail, can't deliver the water, and so the tree then starts to grow gnarly because it's short of water. Anyhow, pruning can induce that visual effect. And so pruning forces trees to change direction, and so you get branches that do this rather than this, which is what young trees have. And so in the pruning of pines, what we want to do, and especially in bonsai world or in artistic world, is to, at least for me, is to produce shorter needles on the trees. Now, shorter needles make the trees look more orderly and allow more light to penetrate, which allows for some buds to show up back on the branches. And so normal needle length on a black pine, let's walk over here and look at one. These are Japanese black pines. They're about 30 years old in varying stages of development. Some of them have cones on there. Some of them haven't been pruned for 2 years, 3 years maybe. And you can see last year's needles were only this long. It means it was a little short of water. But the year before they were this long, and the year before that they were this long. And so if you had this tree covered with needles that long, you wouldn't see any of the trunk or the branch pattern. And so the solution for a tree like this is to prune it. And as long as you leave needles back in, we can take off this year's new growth. This is what you're mostly going to be doing. So this is this year's new growth on here. And of course I'll take off these cones. Well, I'll leave the cones. It doesn't really matter. But I want to remove all of this new growth so that the tree then will grow again this summer, and it'll produce short shoots and short needles. And whether it's a landscape tree or whether it's a bonsai, that's more better than long needles, which you have to kind of clip to make it look good on the tree itself. So That was this year's new growth. This was last year's growth. We can take it back to here. We still have buds and things back here. So as long as you leave, but you can't really prune back to a shoot like this here and just take it off here and expect anything to happen, okay? You've got to have some needles. Now with proper pruning on this, in this case we're going to take off the new growth and just shorten those things down. And if we fertilize it concurrent with that, and Miracle-Gro is the fertilizer of choice because it's hot, meaning it's got a lot of nitrogen, you can get some back budding back in here, and then you could get rid of this lengthy thing and prune the back. The buds are going to come out where they're once, this is called a node, where these sprouts are, or where the new growth ends. That's a node, and there's lots of buds right there. And so, get over here closer and you can see where the nodes are on here. So this is a node. You see this cluster of lines on here? And that's a node. And that's a node. And you know that that's a node because it changed direction, so that had to be. And so there's a whole bunch of places here where you can get shoots out if you have enough energy here and if you prune it right. So that's the advantage of having short needles, is the light gets in there and it encourages it to send out more growth back in. So
on this one,
yeah,
taking off all of these shoots.
That's what we're going to do out there today. We're going to take all these off. I mean, my reality is that I'd take it back to here, because I just don't need this to be long and straight, right? And so we can take it back to there and take this off, which is the same thing. Take those off of there, and it will help induce more budding right in here, and you might get a few buds back where these nodes are. So it's not really very complicated. It's just kind of a dedicated kind of pruning. And on most of the trees that we're going to be working on, they get pruned every year, so we don't have to take big chunks out here unless we're really into a new tree kind of design. But decandling, and that's what this is. Now, the timing on the pruning makes a lot of difference. In the spring, these things look like a barren, like the tree is flipping you off, right? There's all these phallic symbols poking up all over. And a lot of people will go out and break those off. And that's perfectly good, except that the resultant regrowth will give you real long needles, okay? Which is kind of contrary to what you want. So the idea, the perfection, is to prune the tree when it's weakest. And it's weakest when it has expended all of its energy on this new growth that's coming out here. And so when it's just a candle, it's half of the energy. And so it leaves half for the tree to regrow. And so you get long needles. But this time of year, it's expended with these needles coming out. That's using up a lot of energy in there. And so this is a pretty good time to prune. You can even do it later, especially on the black pines, taking those things off of there. And the tree then is kind of left with hardly any energy, but it always has enough to send out another shot of growth with real short needles. So this is the ideal. Arguably, the 28th of June is the magic day to prune all your pine trees. Well, I have several hundred of them, so I don't get that done. But I really will prune into July and even into August on black pines and some of the red pines. Scots pines, we pruned it real hard. When was it we went through that Scots pine out here? I can't remember when that was. Was it spring? Well, I can't remember, but almost all trees will respond pretty well, but black pines and red pines in particular are very strong growers, and they will give you a good shot of growth. Let's go over...
So I have a question.
Yeah.
People sometimes talked about single flush pine and double flush pine.
Yeah,
and
most all of them are double.
Okay.
I never have really kept track of that. But I know that in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of single flush trees and second flush. And for me, it's mostly, see if it dies, then I kind of flush it out of my network. So I'm a little short on that, but I'm real good on how to make pines have real short needles. And so
Some people say that the Japanese white pine may be a single flush pine.
well, I don't
and-
think that it is,
Uh-huh.
but I don't have a single one because they
okay.
don't behave.
Okay.
And so I have one white pine in the garden, and it's a big one that's in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't really talk to you about the white pines. I've tried them over the years, and they just didn't behave
Okay.
the way I want my trees to behave, and so we kind of got caught on. I'm going to show you one over here that I pruned real early this year. It's a red pine, and I cut it real hard just to see how it would respond, and it just has exploded. Good growth over there. It's kind of interesting to see how orderly people are when they have a huge parking area. Figuring out, well, let's see, where should I park? Yeah, well, the shade right now. So this red pine over here, which is from 1960, one of my early trees. This was probably done in April, and so it's pretty exuberant. Of course, these will send long needles out because it has a lot of energy. One of the designs in this thing, which you weren't here for the first part, is I'm trying to induce short needles and short growth. And so I want to prune later in the year, not when the candle is just a bare candle, but I want it to have sent its needles out, because that means the tree is at its weakest point. It's expended all of its energy on that new growth. Then you cut it off, and then the tree says, "Ah, I've got a little," and you get a little, and it works great. So it really depends on what you're doing. If you're grooming a big tree in a yard and long needles don't really matter too much, you can just come out in the spring and break these candles off with your fingers. But this time of year, with the needles coming out of these candles like this, you can't break these off anymore. You have to cut them. And so it's a pruning thing. But when they are just a barren candle, they just snap right off of there real easily. But I never really prune, although I did this guy real early that way, just to see whether I'd get a better reaction. And it's pretty reactive. The problem is that I have a lot of these old intersections with nothing happening. I still have needles, and at the base of each needle there is a bud. It's called a fascicular bud. So the fascicle is what holds the needles together, and the fascicle is this wrap on the, well, I don't see a wrap on there, but the thing that holds the needles together is the fascicle, and there is a bud in there. But the only way you're going to actuate it is by heavy pruning and fertilizing and forcing it to then turn into a sprout. Once it falls off the branch, where you don't see any of those on here, you have no potential for any shoots coming out other than where the nodes are. So for some reason, I've never been able to get any buds out of these, even though I have still green needles. I've only got one shoot on this thing. And these were shoots last year out of here. So this is kind of a mystery tree. Even though I've had it for all these years, I still haven't really figured it out. But I know that pruning it early has given me this huge response. And now what I need to do is take all of these and shorten them down to some of the needles so that it looks like it is cared for, rather than just turning into a big bush. So there's a lot of kind of additional pruning to do, and then you should get buds on here for next year. So that's kind of the process. So what we want to do is go out into the bonsai garden, and I've got several kind of advisors here that are good at pruning pines, and get you guys going on some of these great pines that are out in the bonsai garden, and show you how you do it. So hit me with questions if you've got any.
What's the right tool? I didn't bring all my tools. I'm not sure I brought the right thing.
Well, The trouble with most pruners like this is hard to get in there.
So I brought the wrong tool.
Well, it's okay. It's going to work.
I got those.
I use these for everything. Dog nails, my toenails, wire, pruning things up to this big. You keep them sharp and you work on them and you get in close and you don't leave stubs. Now stubs don't really matter on candles, but the closer you're cutting them, the more better it looks. So anyhow, so any kind of pruner is going to work, but you're going to find yourself kind of hamstrung with these big bulky things when you could have this little thing and just kind of go in there and just cut those things off. So anyhow, best laid plans. But okay.
I got extra scissors.
Oh, do you?
I think.
Yeah, and actually we sell these here, and they're $35.
Oh, okay.
And so they're just, I mean, I sell hundreds of these because I prune for clients professionally, not bonsai so much, but landscaping. I was over in Tacoma yesterday in this huge yard, and she saw me working with these things and said, where do you get those? I said, visit the garden. $35 will change your life, and you'll love pruning because you don't fight this big bulky thing, and we're not having to work very hard to cut these things
So you
off.
commented on some of the lower branches doesn't produce a needle. Is it possible that the lower branches are a little bit weaker and it's apically dominant?
Well, definitely. Most of the energy is up at the top of a tree. And so pruning the top harder hopefully will redirect energy. The trouble with this thing is that this is so gnarly, it's hard to get any energy from here to transfer through all of this network down to here. But if I have one shoot here, and if I treat it right, I can turn that into a display in 3 or 4 years of many shoots. And so the important thing is to take what you can get, but I've got a lot of it here, and so it's that's it. So that's a Japanese red pine, Pinus densiflora, and I have quite a few of these in the bonsai garden as bonsais, but they're the weeping form. So Pinus densiflora pendula, so it just wants to kind of be gnarly, which is a lot easier than the vertical growers. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the garden.